You're listening to Graphic Novel Explorers Club podcast, an audio book club.
Thanks for checking out today's episode of Graphic Novel Explorers Club. I'm one of your hosts, Dennis Supachana. I'm joined by Johnny Flores.
Hello.
And Francis Preziosi.
Hello.
Today, we're discussing Mr. Punch by Neil Gaiman. We hope you've already read today's title because all three of us have. We'll be discussing it in detail, so beware, spoilers ahead. We'd love for you to share your opinion and thoughts on social media. You can find us on Twitter at GN Explorers Club or on Facebook, or our email is gnexplorersclub@gmail.com. Graphic Novel Explorers Club is available on iTunes, Stitcher, and wherever podcasts are available. For our next episode, we'll be discussing Alan's War by Emmanuel Guibert.
You butchered that, but that's all right.
Okay.
No, I think it's Guibert.
Okay, Guibert. Whatever.
Guibert.
Today's graphic novel is written by Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. Did I say that right?
He illustrated it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
He illustrated it. This was published in 1994, and it follows the story of a young boy who spends the summer with his grandparents. And the play, Mr. Punch, plays a puppet show plays a big role in his development and kind of how he loses his innocence during the summer spent with his grandparents. And it's also the journey of an adult man trying to recapture what he remembers from his childhood and how memories kind of fail us.
I'll have to take your word on that because
it does.
Asterisks.
I only read the first few pages because I thought I had one more day to record.
Oh, no. Are you serious?
Yeah, so I show up, and Johnny's like, are we recording today? And I was like, are we? And then...
You didn't read it?
No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I read part of it.
Okay, you can talk about the part you read, and
Yeah,
you can talk about the art.
The introduction.
Yes.
No.
if you want to flip through my book, Johnny.
No, I don't want to disservice the... I'll disservice this podcast, but I won't disservice
Well,
the
if you
book.
want to look at the art.
I've flipped through a lot of it.
Okay.
Well, that's not true.
Well, so let me start by saying,
Okay.
because I just like to talk tonight all the time. I discovered this graphic novel in 1999, and I was 19, and this is what really got me into comic books. I was at a Barnes & Noble, very mainstream store, and I saw this on the shelf, and I bought it, which was a big deal back then to buy a book, and because it was money. And
Well, it also must have been probably when Barnes & Noble's was first kind of selling comic books. I don't remember them always selling them.
They didn't. I think that's why this kind of caught my attention. And it was the first time for me. There was no fake boobs or sexualization of women and all the superhero action going on.
It's all the cool stuff.
Right. There's nothing cool in this one.
Yeah.
So it really grabbed my attention, and it started me down this path. And look at me now. When I first handed you the comic book, you seemed very excited, Johnny, because of the author.
Yeah, because Neil Gaiman he's one of those people that he is very similar to me in my opinion. Michael Chabon or Cabin, I don't know how you say his last name. The guy who wrote the Wonder Boys and the Incredible or the Adventures of Cavalier and Clay, which he won the Pulitzer for. And that he's not afraid to try out different genres of writing.
Yeah, I mean, he's done Doctor Who episodes.
Yeah.
He's done novels. And, I mean, a lot of people, at least for me, my first exposure was Sandman comics.
And then a lot of people's first exposure, I imagine, was the Coralina movie, which he wrote the book that was based on.
Right.
And then, but then, yeah, he wrote American Gods, which is going to be a TV show, I think, on HBO or one of those.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, premium cable networks. So he covers so many different genres of writing that I was like, oh, cool, Neil Gaiman. Like I was pretty jazzed to see that.
And then you just threw it to the side.
No.
And ignored it.
And yeah, you know what? How
dare you?
I had no idea that he wrote these kind of books, I guess. It didn't seem like the traditional comic.
It's not
novel.
a traditional one. It's almost like
It's like a diary.
Well, when I was flipping through it, there's a local comedian, a local artist named Jill that I had on my other podcast, who deals specifically in collage art, And that's what this reminded me of. It's almost like a collage of stuff, especially that opening image of the or the first time he sees that image right there, where it's got the
fancy stage. It looks like.
But then it's got, I don't know, it's just very ornately done. You can tell it was set up in a studio. Someone photographed it. The photos of Mr. Punch, it looks like it was a real puppet. It looks like somebody was probably commissioned to make a puppet.
Is it multimedia or is it multimedium?
I don't see exactly. It's kind of both.
Yeah,
it's multimedia and a multimedia.
And he does use like family photos in some of the layers.
Yeah, when he was talking about his grandfather, like you could tell it's a photo. I don't know. It's really cool the way that he layered it. Where I don't know if it was him or the quote unquote illustrator that did it. Where there's a photo of a grandfather, the one who's in the madhouse. He talks about like my father's father was
right,
and they imposed an image of the child telling the story over that, and it was a very effective way of showing a memory and the nostalgia of a parent, where it's like when you're a child you don't have a clear image of a grandparent, especially if they die when you're young. It's, I don't know, just like that haziness. It was beautifully done.
Yeah. At first, I'll be honest, when I flipped through it, I was like, this looks so 90s. Like,
and it is.
Well,
like Sandman. Sandman's very 90s.
Yeah. Well, the thing for me was like all the photo stuff looked like it came from like a Photoshop tutorial book, because I used to look at those a lot. But after and then it looked chaotic to me. I just like, this is gonna be a mess. Like the lettering's all over the place. It's loosey goosey. But to be honest, I thought it was very well done. I think it conveyed the kind of what Francis was talking about, this whole like haziness and memory.
Yeah, and the font looks, it's more of a written font,
right?
As
exactly.
opposed to a sans serif or calligraphic.
But yeah,
calligraphic, is that a word?
Yeah.
But like you said, it's like it was like a craft project, a scrapbook. I don't know. It was just like all over the place, but it felt well focused.
Well, I think and a lot of the images in this you could almost pull out and individually put on display as an art piece. Like that's an amazing thing.
I agree with that.
Just about anything in there you could pull out and present by itself, and even without the lettering or font or any story, if you were just to hang one of those in a gallery, I think people would stop and look at it.
And it may be because it's the nature of the story, but I mean, I've read comic books where the art is really inconsistent. Usually the superhero types, and it just bugs the shit out of me. And yeah, I mean, this is all over the place, but I don't know. It just felt organic, like we're going through his mind, and that's some stuff is crystal clear.
Yeah.
Some of it is a caricature. Some of it is an actual photograph because it's such a real moment, and some of it is this haze, like you were talking about. And yeah, I mean, it really worked for me.
When things get hazy, the parts that I read of it, it reminded me, and I'm almost wondering if Michel Gondry got some inspiration from this for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, when Jim Carrey's mind is starting, when memories are starting to be erased, and he'll be talking in the memory. He's in the memory, and it'll be clear, and then he turns, and something's been erased from part of that, and it's like they just ran over and put a plastic sheen,
right,
like a really crumpled old plastic piece of clear tarp over the actor behind him, and then they filmed that to make it seem like, oh, it's starting to fade out. I don't know. It's beautifully done.
I think too, the colors are pretty dark. It's very dark. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the first one we read. What was that with the Joker?
Killing Joke.
Yeah, thank you. Just with the color, and I felt like, and when you're kind of reading it too, you can almost kind of, for me anyway, the coloring specifically, you can almost feel this little boy's isolation. He's with his grandparents on the summer. He's like at the sea town, and he doesn't really have a lot of friends. He kind of like wanders a lot. So, and I think we should probably explain what the Punch and Judy show is too, because that plays a big role in this.
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of had a vague sense of what it was. I actually looked it up on the internet and actually researched it a little more because my clearest memory, I don't know about you guys, but I kind of remember like these kind of puppets being like Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
But not violent.
Judy reminds me of the short blonde-haired puppet.
The lady.
The one who lived like it looked like a.
Oh, in the castle.
Yeah.
Not in the castle. She lived in the.
She was always a mischievous like.
Well, she lived in the thing. So there was the castle, the oak tree or whatever it is with the owl, and then there was the. It looked like columns, almost like it was like an old Roman or Greek building. It had columns and it was rounded, and she would pop up, and she always looked angry.
Yeah,
she had short, messy, blonde,
rosy cheeks. A rosy nose.
Whoa, excuse me. I forget that character's name, but that's who Judy always reminded me of, is her, and she would creep the fuck out of me when I was a kid.
No, I didn't. I never liked her. I felt like she was like evil.
Yeah, I always like I don't know. She just seemed, just unhappy with everybody.
Lady Elaine Fairchild, I believe.
So she was a lady.
Yeah.
Oh,
That's
so
what
she
her
was related to
title
the king
says.
or the queen.
Yeah, I don't know how that works.
Maybe she's so scary.
Friday wasn't the king's name.
Yeah,
Friday?
King Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and then I know about I don't know if they're related. The punching nuns, those kind of puppets.
They might be.
Yeah.
But yeah, Punch and Judy had been around for
a long
hundreds of years.
Yeah, I think 16th century. Is that right, Francis?
I believe so. I believe that is correct. Yeah. So what this puppet show is for Punch and Judy is basically Punch is this wicked man, and he's married, and the wife gives the baby to him for a minute, and he throws it out the window so it dies. Then the wife comes back and complains, and he starts beating her to death.
With a stick.
Yeah, the police come to capture him, and he kills them. He convinces the hangman to hang himself, like he tricks him, and then he somehow outwits the devil as well. So...
Oh, I didn't know all this was in the Punch and Judy story. I thought it was just him hitting her in the head with a stick.
I thought it was just the hitting in the stick thing, but I didn't realize there was actually like a structure to the story that always starts with the baby and the wife, and then progressively gets worse, so to speak.
I wonder if there's like I wonder what Punch and Judy was born out of. Like there had to have been
that's a good question.
Some precursor story that got adapted, or because a lot of folk tales, or not folk tales, but like fairy tales and stuff like that were born out of other stories.
For sure.
So I'm curious to what may have led.
I did do a little bit of research because I was confused about the whole voice thing, and it turns out if you watch
what's
videos,
the voice thing?
Mr. Punch sounds very distinctive because what it is for all the other characters, the professor, and that's what they're known in their profession for doing the Punch and Judy. The professors use a special mouthpiece.
Oh, like one of those little side.
It's like between their tongue and the roof of their mouth.
Yeah.
And it's like a metal and like a reed, and it creates this almost like chipmunk metallic helium kind of sound.
Isn't that what a Jew's harp is? Isn't that something that you put in your?
I'm sure that there's other instruments that are very similar to that. But and then so the trick is that the professor only uses it for Mr. Punch. So for other ones, he doesn't take it in and out.
Who's the professor?
The puppeteer.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So what happens is, the book starts that he's out fishing with his grandfather, and he's really bored and tired of the fishing, and he sees this abandoned
Well, and the grandfather seems to only be. It seems to be more of a contemplative thing for the father to go fishing. It's like alone time. He's not successful at ever catching fish, but he just seems to enjoy the process of catching a fish.
Just to clarify, the professor, I'm not referring to the actual character. They actually call in the profession.
Yeah, the professor.
The professor is the puppeteer for the Punch and Judy type shows. So there is a guy who's called the professor in here, but it turns out that's what they call all of them.
Anybody who's Punch or Judy is known as the professor?
The guy who basically does this show, yeah.
Right. So what happens is the little boy wanders in and he sees the show, and then his grandfather, and this is I don't know if you've seen the show already or not, but you see all these violent acts happening, and then his grandfather created kind of this seaside arcade, but it's not near the sea, and he eventually hires a professor to come and do the Punch and Judy. The Punch and Judy show for like a few weeks.
But the Punch and Judy show, when he discovers it's almost like the Zoltar in Big,
right?
Where it's independent of anything else. It's by itself. It's just on the beach, and he walks into it, and the puppets almost seem to be sentient. You're not aware that there's any like there would be a puppeteer operating these two. They're just all of a sudden they're like, oh, let's go, and they start the show.
And that's the interesting thing. What Dennis was getting at is that it's the professor. He manages all the puppets, and it's only one person who does the whole show. And what they were saying is Mr. Punch never leaves as the left hand, never leaves one of the hands,
right?
And then all the other that same person uses the right hand, and that's why they have to kill so many people, because they only have the other hand.
Oh.
So he kills the baby,
right?
And the baby's a special puppet. It's like on a stick. It's unlike all the other puppets. And then he kills the wife. He switches the hand. It comes into, and this becomes pretty important in the story, which we can get into in a little bit.
Right. Yeah. To go off of what Johnny was talking about, I was a little weirded out by the beginning. So they're doing a typical, like, they're going out fishing with my grandfather kind of thing, which actually resonated with me, because I remember as a kid not giving a shit about going fishing at 5 a.m., but my dad wanting to do it and just being bored as hell. And
that was your church.
Yeah. Instead of a Punch and Judy tent, though, I found an old Street Fighter machine, which not quite the same thing. But I was
think
weird.
Street Fighter's been around for about 400 or 500 years.
Yeah,
now.
probably something like that. Well, Dulcim's pretty old. But I was weirded out by when he first discovered the tent, because one, it's unmanned. It starts doing stuff, but then when he runs away and he looks back, I think he just finds
the wind is blowing, and you can see through.
And there's nothing
to
right?
the beach behind it. So yeah, there's no human legs.
Did he just see these grotesque? I mean, they're pretty horrific looking puppets.
Well, and the baby's got like blood coming out of its mouth, and it's got like it's stuck in a crying pose, but it could also be a painful pose, like with its mouth and its eyes
It almost
shut.
seemed like when it fell and died, it looked like it was a different face even.
Yeah, it looked a little more contorted, and the mouth looked a little more round and open. You could tell that was like just carved from wood though, and stained, and like the lips were stained red.
Right.
I don't know. It was great.
That part I didn't get. Like, was he imagining it and just he saw?
But that's the thing. Like, did he's remembering?
Oh, that's
it.
right. His memory. That's
his
right.
memory is just happening upon it.
Right.
But you have to, you know.
So he's an unreliable narrator, because his memory is kind of just going back and forth. So the memory of the puppet show, it sticks out in his head, but he forgets about all the other.
Yeah,
stuff
he
like,
forgets that there was actually a human being operating.
Right.
And there probably, and like nobody else is on that beach. Like, why would the puppet show be set up at 5 a.m.?
Right.
You know, like I don't know. Either way, like, it's one of those things where I take it as being what it is, and I don't try to like dissect too much.
Right. Make it
like,
rational.
Yeah, I don't try to add too much reality to it. I was like, oh, this is somebody's memory.
Although, going off of what Francis said earlier, I actually did think a lot about The Killing Joke. At least my original copy. Remember how it had the weird colors and everything like that? I felt in many ways both of them were kind of this weird dream. The Killing Joke more of a fever dream, but this one, definitely had an unreal quality that was unsettling. There was always this, almost like it was a horror comic, but it wasn't in the traditional sense. There's no like Scream guy or grudge ghost.
The Mr. Punch is fucking frightening looking, and
he's a murderer.
Yeah,
he's very Joker-like. Yeah, really.
And the rest of the illustrations are very garish. They're not beautifully drawn. They're beautiful in themselves, but they're not drawn to express beauty.
Yeah, on the cover, Mr. Punch is in a red suit with a red hat, and that was the big thing in The Killing Joke, was the red helmet and the red. So, I wonder now. But it does have that darkness, and it almost makes you uncomfortable as you're reading it, just slightly, like what's going to happen, what's going on.
I felt like I was peering into someone's like nightmare.
Yeah, I have to say too. So I read this when I was 19, and I remember being very disturbed. Like, and then reading it again, I wasn't as disturbed because I was over the shock. I knew the shock of Mr. Punch, and I was actually able to focus more on the memories and the story being told. And it was a much different experience this time. from that.
When was the last time you read the book?
About 5 years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I've had this book for a really, really long time, and it's kept deep in my bookcase when out of my closet with all my other books. But every once in a while I pull it out, and I.
You know how I know this is a comfort book for you? Because when I was reading through it, like I looked through the back part of it just to see what there was like an afterword or anything like that, and there was like breadcrumbs or like some sort of pie crust stuck in there. I was like, oh, this is like her snacky book.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm feeling deep. Let's read it. So he stumbles upon this, and then he remembers his mom getting pregnant, and for some reason he's sent away to his grandparents. And this is the thing, the story is not linear.
Yeah.
It goes back and forth quite a bit. And as he mentions, his grandfather does go crazy, and he's remembering the summer.
His paternal grandfather.
Thank you. Yeah, his paternal grandfather goes crazy before, and this is like his last summer with his grandfather that he remembers. So he just remembers his mom got pregnant, and for some reason he had to go stay with his grandparents. Either he had the chicken pox or something, and nobody in his family really remembers either. And he stumbles upon this show, and then the grandfather is trying to build up his arcade, if you will. It's not really an arcade, but he has an exhibit of a mermaid.
Well, I think that's the old school term of an arcade, where it's just maybe some sort of like things to see. So
Well, you'd have like a penny arcade where you could watch
those movies,
this
right?
The initially going into this, when I saw Mr. Punch, I was like, oh, this must be set like in the Victorian era.
Right.
It's not. It's set like in the late 60s, early 70s.
Right.
It's not, because he talks about there was no joggers around. That wouldn't be for another 10 years.
Oh, that's right. He did say
and
that,
he had pointed out his first hippie. His grandma pointed out his first hippie, which had only been 3 weeks earlier. So this has to be like 66, 64, somewhere like mid to early 60s. So so back then that probably would have been like like the cinescope where it just spins in a circle, a zoetrope, and you look through and you see the cartoon spinning, or you put a penny in and you watch a cartoon on a little where you just put your eyes right up to the screen, or like those games where you shoot BB guns, you try and knock out the star, that kind of arcade.
Yeah, they had something like that in the San Francisco North Beach or something like that, one of those old-fashioned ones.
Or like Santa Cruz Boardwalk kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, and he was saying his grandfather's shop is struggling because it's not actually
On
by
the
the
beach.
sea. Yeah, it's more tucked away. But he has this prized possession, which is the mermaid, which is an actual woman dressed in a suit, and she looks like she's topless.
Yeah.
In the drawings.
Which, surprisingly enough, you didn't have to pay to see. I would think that's something you like. Hey, you want to get a ticket? Or
See
something
them
like that.
titties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to see some mermaid titties?
And so yeah,
So that's what
she
how I
says
would've
some
pictured.
limerick or something like that, and she just kind of hangs out.
Yeah, that's basically what she does.
She's filing her nails
And
in the
then-
water.
One of the grandfather's friends comes and is like, "Hey, I want to do this thing here. Let's go talk." And he kind of shares with the grandson, the grandfather's friend, like this arcade, it's going down because of how poorly kept it is, and just nobody wants to come. And
Well, everyone wants the beach.
yeah, and it's kind of the first sign of failure, kind of like, because I think the
Where
story
the kid is conscious of it.
right. I think this is an important story of like, it's kind of, for me, I'm really random right now. Sorry, but
No, don't worry.
we're all, it's a comic book thing.
Well, it jumps around.
It does. And so it's hard to like pinpoint, but I think every kid has that realization of an adult being less than. Like you kind of put them on this pedestal, or like if you kind of like realize like, oh, an adult is failing. I thought adults didn't fail.
Or not so much that, or where you're like, the first time like outside trouble, kind of like you're aware of it.
Yeah,
Or
that's a good way to put
the
it.
stress of something, or
Your shelter's kind of
like you're just
splintering.
You're just, whereas like, a younger child, even by a few months, you may not be consciously aware of an issue, but then just that slight turn where you gain the insight to be like, oh, something's wrong. Like, oh, and I'm overhearing it. They don't think I am aware of this, but I'm the adult, quote unquote adults.
And as a kid, it's a weird point where like you're conscious that, hey, this isn't what I'm used to, but it's like this weird realization that you're becoming more mature, sort of. And I think the one that actually hit home for me was when I don't remember what part of the book, it was all over the place, but when he saw his grandfather crying, and like it affected him, because then suddenly he had to become like a little adult, because he felt like he had to, like, you're not used to that. You're used to crying and an adult coming over to
comforting you.
And then here you feel like, well, I have to comfort the adult, which is really weird. And to think, what could make an adult so sad that they're crying? And I mean, that's a vivid memory for me. And so that really hit home. And I felt like he did capture kind of that turning point where innocence is starting to be lost, and not some weird, super tragic Batman way, but like in a realistic, like, things are happening to your family that maybe is not so cool.
I'm just watching you.
My ear, it's like I've had my inside of my ear has been itchy.
So how far into the book did you get?
I opened the cover, and then I fell asleep.
You saw the breadcrumbs, and you're like, hey, it's snack time.
Yeah. I was like, oh, there's snacks in here. That's right. I have snacks in my house. Your little crumb remnants.
So I'll just keep going then with what I remember.
Yeah. No. I got to the point where basically where he was talking about his grandparents. Like the one went to the madhouse
where they had the big head of the grandfather.
Yeah.
Which I had to look up. I didn't know what Daimler. Anyway, it's a motor company. It's like Ford, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, Daimler Chrysler.
Yeah. I see. I didn't. Yeah.
It's a German company.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
and they own Mercedes Benz. And
when he said that my black Daimler hit the wall, I was like, what the hell is that?
So the friend comes. I'll just keep synopsising.
The grandfather's friend.
Yeah, comes, and he starts doing the show. And that's when the little boy learns that the puppeteer is called the Professor. And he takes him back one day to see all the puppets. And throughout the comic book, I think it's important to Mr. Punch and Judy, or Punch and Judy, keeps kind of playing throughout the comic book. So this is something that he keeps seeing a lot as a child.
So through the run of the comic book, because I wasn't a good podcast host, or nor do I know how to say the word podcast. Are they done in the photo reel?
Yes.
Is it all photos of the actual real puppets?
Yes.
And then his memories are all they're all illustrations?
Some photo illustrations too. But yeah, the puppet stuff is for the most part done in the actual photos, where there's occasional drawings, but
yeah. So the professor takes him back, and that's when he explains. Punch always stays on. I'm just gonna say the left hand. I think.
Yeah,
it's the left.
We'll stay consistent.
Stays on one hand.
Yeah, stays on one hand, and then the other characters come throughout. And I just had it open too. There was one character. What is her name? She's right here.
Pretty Polly?
Yeah. Now, here are the old members of the cast who are no longer a part in the tragedy. This is Pretty Polly. She's Mr. Punch's little bit of stuff. Hey, Mr. Punch's girlfriend. This is the professor telling him this.
His mistress.
Yes.
His little bit.
Which is actually, I found out that's true. That was an actual puppet that was removed from the show eventually.
And the little boy still, he doesn't recall why. The professor doesn't know why, but they just... So all the professors who do the show do it very similar. They all follow the same thing. But so he lets the little boy try on the crocodile. And he says, at first, it's this lifeless thing, but I was wrong. As soon as I put the crocodile on my hand, it came to life. And he kind of saw the power that he could have as the professor by making things, create. He didn't want to give the crocodile away, but he eventually had to.
It's interesting because I watch Mythbusters. I don't watch Mythbusters. I haven't seen that in a really long time. But who are the two hosts of Mythbusters?
I forget their
names.
names.
Myth and Buster.
Yeah, Donnie Myth and Ricky Buster. The one who's got the goatee.
Yeah.
He has a
Wait,
YouTube.
Don't they both have goatees?
No.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. Not the one with the big goatee. The blonde-haired guy. Not the one with shaved head and goatee.
Not the one who wears the beret all the time.
Yeah, not that guy. The other one. Mm-hmm. We'll call him Ricky. He's got a show on YouTube now, and he went to a puppeteer because he does like a day build where they'll make something in a day. And for some reason, he went to a puppeteer because he wanted to make a puppet, and the guy made him a puppet. He went to the guy who made all the puppets for Avenue Q.
Oh, okay.
And so they made him one, and he said it was crazy. He goes, as soon as you put your hand in it, you want to animate the character. So he started doing doing it with my hands.
You are, yeah, that's so funny.
But like, yeah, he started like moving it around,
Right.
and he's like, yeah, it was like a natural extension. Like my hand just brought this thing to life naturally. So
I'm glad you said that because that will come back up later because this is very important. So, in addition to the professor, is someone called a bottler, and the bottler,
Yeah.
they go around and collect the money. So all the kids come in, they start watching the play. The guy goes around with the hat, and they collect the pennies. And the professor says, "This is how you pick a bottler. You give the kid 5 flies."
Live flies
in the hand, and you give them the hat to collect the money. And
in the other hand.
Yeah, thank you. And the little boy's like, "Why 5 flies? Do you want to fit?"
Well, basically, if any one of them is either dead or gone, then you know that the bottler has taken from the hat. So the live flies is to ensure that his other hand doesn't go into the hand with the money.
Oh, I see.
I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, that was pretty
given
good.
off the top.
Yeah, so they hire a bottler, and he's about 16, and it's interesting because he talks about, back then I thought bottlers were like these adults, and realizing now as an adult, he's probably just 15, 16, not much older than the kids, but that they were intimidating still.
Yeah.
No,
there's very distinct. I remember we went to Catalina Island, and there was, I believe it was Catalina Island with my dad and one of his ex-wives, and on the island there was an arcade. And I wanted to go play a game. And so there was what I thought were adults. And they probably were 14, 15 years old. And I was probably 10 or 11, not much younger than them. And I told these kids, like, "Excuse me, sir, can I get by to play this game?" And the kids turn around and like, "Blah, this little shit called me sir." Blah. And I was like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize they were children." And went over and
I
played
definitely
my
got
game.
a carny feel from this whole thing.
Yeah, that's a good way to
very,
put it.
like,
Yeah.
kind of shifty, kind of
grifters.
Yeah,
Trying to get one up on the stooge.
Yeah.
So after he kind of tries on the puppet, he kind of goes to the back, and he overhears his uncle talking to the mermaid. Is that right? Is that the right flow?
Is the mermaid
at some point? Yeah,
It happens at some point.
Is he shagging the mermaid?
Well, no, but he says something like, "It was so hard to cover it up the last time."
Right.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't sure, was that implying murder?
Or an abortion, or
right, or if she's pregnant or somebody.
Right.
And it's made clear very early on that the grandfather is in love with this mermaid. And so you don't know if maybe something is happening now or something has happened.
I'm curious how old the grandfather actually is. He's probably remembering an old man. This guy's probably like my age in his 40s.
It's hard to say. I mean, it could legitimately be that the grandfather is old, and he just found some young gal
Strumpet
to just, hey, all you have to do is sit on a rock and say some limerick, and you'll be okay. And she's not. It's weird because the pictures make her seem kind of attractive, but when that bottler talks about her, he says, well, she doesn't quite fit her outfit.
Yeah, like maybe she's a little on the hefty side.
There's Charles Bukowski is one of my favorite writers, and there's a really good documentary about him called Born Into This, and he talks about he didn't get his first real girlfriend until he was like in his mid-20s, and he, whenever he writes about her, he always says like, "Oh, she had great legs," and she was 10 years older than him.
Mm-hmm.
It was this knockout beauty. And then in the documentary, we just have his recollection of her. And in the movie, one of his coworkers from the post office was like, she was nothing. She was not anything pleasant to look at.
Well, and that's a great point that we're looking back at his memories. And I can imagine you see a naked woman, like a mermaid, in your mind being whatever age he was, 10, what it was. Or even less than that, maybe. You probably think she's the most beautiful woman in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember going on a camping trip and falling in love with a girl who worked at the bait shop. And I remember she was like the most beautiful girl I had ever seen. I remember the last day we were there, I was so compelled that we were like driving.
How old were you?
I was probably like 10.
Uh-huh.
And then we were driving away. I told my dad, look, I gotta go to the diner really quick. There's a diner bait shop. I ran into the diner bait shop. She was working the counter. I was like, I just want to say, you're like the most beautiful girl I've ever seen in my entire life. And then like I just ran out of there. And I remember one old person like looking at me like kind of like, thumbs up kind of look. And I was like, why would I? Like, I look back now, I was like, why would I say that?
I
didn't even wait for her to respond. I was like, I just had, like, I felt so strongly.
Compelled to.
Yeah, I had to tell her.
How old do you think she was?
Oh, she was probably like 14, 15.
Oh.
And so, yeah, I can understand where in his mind, he probably romanticized the whole look of her.
She probably still remembers that. It's like, I remember this little brown kid came up to me with this bowl haircut.
Well, if you're listening, I'm not available. Sorry.
You had your chance.
She's like, oh, yeah. Stuck around forever.
And so what's interesting about the uncle is he's a hunchback. And the grandmother keeps saying, I think he had polio or something. But later on, when he's at like a family event, he hears something about like him being pushed out the window.
like a baby from Punch and Judy.
It's really unclear if the uncle was hurt or if it really was a disease. That's always an unclear.
My grandfather, we don't know. My grandfather was kind of hunchback. And I don't know the full details on the story of like he was. I've heard several different stories where most of them where he was accidentally dropped, but his like shoulders were almost up by past his ears because he had just like this really funky posture like this.
Well, so that's another thing they said too, because now that you brought that up, one of the aunties or something said something about how there was a chance to fix him, but they never took him to the hospital in time. Mm-hmm. And when they did, it was too late.
And he was bitter about it, wasn't he?
Yeah, so it's almost like he was like an afterthought. So nobody really is sure why the uncle's a hunchback, but it could be mischievous play and parents didn't care, or if he did get a disease and they didn't act fast enough. But yeah, there is a little bit of bitterness there too. But it also could imply something bad that happened. So, one night, there's a storm, and the grandfather goes to his shop, and the little boy sits in the car for a really long time, and he really has to go to the bathroom. Really, really has to be. So he finally goes into the arcade or whatever to go to the bathroom, and he overhears, or he sees the men talking. There's 3 men.
The grandfather and the friend?
Yes, and there's another guy, isn't there, Dennis?
That's the weird thing. So he thinks he sees 3 shadows of men and then 1 lady, right?
Right.
And... well, go ahead. But that's what he thinks he sees.
No, please continue, because I was a little bit...
Well, and then after a while, he waits, right? And then when he finally goes into the room, he just sees his grandfather. And it's just him, right?
Yeah, and crying. So what he hears, or what he thinks he hears, is there's 2 or 3 men with the mermaid.
Oh, I forgot the main.
Yeah, and there's some yelling and some fighting, and they punch the mermaid in the face, or they hit her with a board.
A board.
In the face and in the stomach.
Yeah.
And then she comes out running, and he sees the blood dripping down her face, and she's clutching her stomach, which led me to believe that maybe she was pregnant, and they were trying to, like, hurt the baby, get rid of the baby.
Grandfather hired those guys to come in and...
Yeah, it's really unclear, and then... So then the men take off, and then he sees his grandfather. I think that's when he sees him crying, or it's in the car.
Yeah, he sees his grandfather crying in the room. I was confused if there were actually 2 other men, or if it was just the play of shadows. So it seemed, once again, his memory's hazy. Like, was it just his grandfather confronting her, and there's like maybe they're violently moving around, so it looks like 3 people, or it's such loud voices, and maybe the grandfather is reacting to this pregnancy, which I got implied as well, and maybe his voice is becoming shrill and different tones, so it sounds like different people. Maybe he's being caring, like, how could you do this? And then suddenly he's screaming, so it sounds like different types of guys, when in fact it's just him. He's the only monster, right? He's the only punch. And then
that's a good observation. Yeah. But he can't like accept that, so maybe he's trying to separate them out.
Right, exactly. And then his grandfather goes punch on the mermaid Judy, and perhaps
with a board,
like
Punch really does.
Yeah, and then with basically making the baby fall out. So yeah,
that's what I got from it too.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then
thanks Planned Parenthood.
And then basically they get back in the car, and the grandfather basically says, that didn't happen.
Yeah, and well, at first too, when they get back in the car, he starts referring to his grandson as his actual son, and I think that's the glimpse of when he starts kind of going crazy, because it is discussed very early on. The grandfather went to a mental hospital and he never came out, and they went to go visit him, and this is the last summer before.
Well, it sounded like the maternal grandfather had dementia, and the paternal grandfather was.
I get confused about the two because one was Arthur. I remember that.
Yeah.
And one took him fishing. I don't remember which one. I think the one who took him fishing was A-OK in terms of the mental. And then the other one owned the arcade.
And that's the one that went to the madhouse?
Yes.
Yeah.
And had the car crash and everything like that.
All right.
Yeah, and then he starts to kind of figure out that is his grandson, Axel Ben Norman. But he says this never happened. So obviously something happened, because you wouldn't have to say that.
Right.
And then the next morning,
makes you wonder how many times he did that in front of his son. If he gets confused about the two.
The grandfather is a really interesting character, because I think what happened earlier in the book, it's basically not just implied but explicitly told that he kind of was a bit of a grifter. He tried to sell soap to people, and it wasn't a good soap. Like, it would
burn your skin.
Yeah, it would be
was
awful.
like fake soap.
Like lye soap.
Yeah, so he basically sell it and then leave town. But the problem was, at one point he got so turned around, he went back to the town.
Shit.
He left a week ago, and then he got the shit beat out of him. And that's when he met this. I think the professor. At that point, and then it talks about how they separated once they. At first, the grandfather was the bottler for the professor, and then eventually he went on to another scam, which was, I think, getting cans of food that had sunk in the river or lake because of some boat sinking, and relabeling the cans to resell them. And then eventually he owned grocery stores.
Oh, wow.
So he became wealthy. So it sounded like the grandfather was a lifelong scam artist. And also
always looking for an angle.
Right. And also sort of implied, I think, that he was a kind of a womanizer. So despite having a wife, he's always probably looking for some young hussy. And
or just someone, and probably it makes you think, how many mermaids were there?
Right. No, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's even this line here. It says, I just lost it. But he did say, there it was. That was what he told me, that my grandfather was a romancer. That's a line in there, because there's a scene where he's with his family as he's older, and he's trying to get the story. He's trying to kind of confirm what he's remembering.
The narrator's trying to,
and it was that was a long time ago. Nobody can really confirm, and also nobody's really privy to what he saw. Only he was the witness to that. So and so we can never get confirmation.
I was just talking to somebody about this, with with old traumas like this, when the person or the people involved that do not want to confront it, either to move on or get closure, whatever, because they don't want the decades and years of the fragile house of cards built on this shaky fucking foundation. If you bring that up and they have to really, really look at the truth of it, both for you and themselves, all that shit just starts coming down. So they can't. They just absolutely cannot.
No, absolutely.
I can see that, yeah. So it kind of ends there, and then he's an adult now, and he goes to this actual festival. It's and there's Punch and Judy shows everywhere, and he talks to this person who's doing the show and selling the puppets, and I love this part, and I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead, but the professor offers the man now, who was the young boy, to try on Mr. Punch. Do you want to try him on? And he says, no, I really can't. And I really liked that line, because to me, earlier in the book, he puts on the crocodile, and the crocodile comes to life. And I think for this man, he knows what the weight is to be Mr. Punch. He knows that comes with a high cost, and he doesn't want to put on that killer. He doesn't want to be that person. And as much as he wanted to try it, and he really, really stops himself. And I thought that was, for me, that just really brings it home. For other people,
he didn't want to follow his grandfather's mistakes.
For other people in the festival, this is just a show. You grew up with it as a kid. For this guy, he lived it. He saw it.
Yeah.
He's going to separate himself from it.
And to emphasize it, I mean, it's very Joker-esque, where they start doing a close-up of the Mr. Punch, and he seems like an innocent puppet when the seller is holding him, and then it just goes into that grotesque grin of his, and it's just like, yeah, there's like an evil behind that.
It really does, yeah. Even the colors change, the close-ups change. It gets pretty disturbing.
Yeah, the interesting thing for me for that scene too was, and I researched it a little bit, was so the professor's name throughout the whole story is Professor, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Swachel.
Yeah.
And so that's his name. Well, it turns out that the kid, now an adult, asks the seller, like, have you ever heard of this guy? Like, maybe he's a famous professor. And then when he says Swachel, well, it turns out that piece I told you about that makes the certain Mr. Punch sound, it's called a Swachel or a Swoozle, or it's a few different names. So really, that was just a pseudonym for the guy. So that wasn't his real name. So, but yeah, that was the secret little device that allows you to make the Mr. Punch sound, which is highly disturbing. If you ever have a chance to go look it on YouTube, it's like a chipmunk helium voice with a metallic kind of sound to it. So,
no, I'm good.
Well, do you want to like read the whole thing now that you heard how great it is?
No, I do. I was gonna knock it out tonight because I thought we were gonna read tomorrow or record this tomorrow, but I blew it because I'm a dumb idiot.
You're not. No, we switched things around. So, what were your thoughts on the comic book?
I thought it was really, really
It's
interesting.
a graphic novel. I'm sorry.
No,
it's a comic book.
Yeah,
Okay.
interchangeable. But
Yeah.
anyway, like I said, first impression when I was flipping through it and I got it, I had no idea what it was about. I didn't read a preview. I thought it was lame. I thought this is a 90s Photoshop.
Well, and it's got all the scatter. I don't know. People who weren't young in the 90s, I guess, or like in the 30s in the 90s, scattered, messy.
Yeah.
Was like, that's how all the design
Grunge.
was.
Everything was grungy.
Yeah.
Like the State. Have you ever watched the intro to the State?
Yeah, exactly.
It
That was
is
exactly like that.
pure fucking 90s. If you're a millennial and you've never heard of the State, it was a improv sketch comedy group in the mid to early 90s.
Members of Reno 911.
Yeah, a lot of them. They've branched. Michael Rainwater, who's directed several popular movies, Long Hot Wet Summer, those guys. Watch the introduction to the State. That is the 90s summed up. It was dark and scattery.
Right.
Just
liquid television almost.
Yeah, but like there was lots of scribbly behind the background, or the intro.
Brown. Lots of brown.
Oh yeah,
brown,
yeah.
sepia colors, with like spatterings of color here and there. But yeah, that's the 90s, and this comic book does look. The cover, anyways, looks very 90s.
So at first, I don't know, and then I kind of looked in the back, and there was something about a CD-ROM. And I was like, oh, man, is this like some failed CD-ROM project that they basically like took screenshots from and added words? But then when I read it, I found it extremely compelling. Even with its chaos, like I said before, it felt like it flowed very well. It felt like a dream. I felt like I was going through some sort of therapy session with this guy, and it was kind of, this stuff was coming up and emerging.
I'm wondering, off of the success of Sandman, if he pitched this to Vertigo, which is a sub-company of DC.
DC Comics Vertigo published this.
Almost like where Steve Soderbergh would have the success from like a Ocean's 11 movie, and then that would get him.
Oh, for sure. You get some sort of creative credit, like, okay, you can do your pet project.
Yeah, like you made so much money on this, we'll give you a little chunk of money from that to make your next thing.
Right.
So I'm almost wondering if Sandman's popularity got this made.
And finally, what interested me too was, it was a multi-medium thing. So it wasn't just drawings. It was like wooden sculptures or whatever, carvings and photographs. And it looked like it was even going to be a real multimedia project where they did the failed CD-ROM. Like, I think they had like a movie, like it would be like a video game where you go through, I think, the Punch and Judy, when I read the Punch and Judy, like
almost like Myst.
Yeah. And then you would see stuff like full motion video, and you click things.
Yeah.
And so you would be exploring different aspects of his mind.
He tweeted you, right?
So I tweeted him, which was pretty cool. And I think he'd answer, like, did the CD-ROM come first? Because that's what I thought at first. I was like, this was like a failed project. And then no, he said the book came together long before, which was actually pretty cool that he tweeted back. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, it at first I thought it was going to be garbage, to be perfectly honest. But I loved it. So
it's a beautiful work of art.
It's a beautiful work of art. I think, even though I couldn't tell you exactly like, oh, this is their journey from point A to B. It's just kind of this weird clips of this guy's mind. I found it very compelling and interesting.
What about you, lady?
Yeah, well, I obviously love
shitty.
it. No,
yeah.
So I actually recommended it. I think this is the only comic book graphic novel that I've recommended. That was like really like I wanted us to read it. Thank you, Dennis, for doing that. But I think too. I think it's very relatable to a lot of people because there is, at least for me too, there is something in my life from my childhood and that actually happened before I was born, but also impacted me. And as I've gathered stories from the years, I could start to see like where the half-truths were, where they weren't. And I was able to kind of piece together the story. And everyone in my family kind of has a different version, has a different thing, but almost like 90% of my family agrees on this one thing. But the holdout, she doesn't. And she's holding to her story.
Yeah.
And and I think too part of the book is though there's real no resolution, and that's what your life is sometimes. When you look back on your childhood or your memories, they do falter, and you don't always have that solid. This is what happened.
Well, and when you have a moment like that where you're like, I want to know the fucking truth about this situation, and then you get it, and you're like, yeah, I think you making an adult decision have to go. Okay, well, I'm either gonna let this continue to bother me and mess with my life, or okay, that's what happened. Now I know I'm going to move on and find.
Doesn't he kind of address that somewhere middle of the book where it's like,
you bring up a good point.
I think he says something where, memories, it's best to go with little short memories, little bits of memory, instead of trying to go for a deep, long memory, because there's a dangerous road, because who knows what you're going to unravel, who knows what your subconscious is buried. Some of this stuff he might remember clearly, but he's purposely shaded it behind the curtain of Mr. Punch so as to not affect him so deeply. And
that's the fucking brilliance of Neil Gaiman, is to he could have told a straight story, and a writer of less ability probably would have just done a straight story, whereas there's so many different subtleties to the book where you're like, okay, well, is it this or that?
Well, and it doesn't frustrate you.
No, it doesn't.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's the quality of a good writer, is where they leave things ambivalent, but you're okay with it.
Yeah, because that's how memories are. How, like, if I was faced with that, I don't know if I want to open that curtain. I don't want to if I want to open that door. And there's just so many unanswered questions, but I didn't feel angry or frustrated like, well, what happened to so and so? What happened to the mermaid? They go in and out of your life.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't care about any of that.
Yeah. But it's not like you didn't care about it. I mean, when you saw that she got hit, that's
well, really, you'd be like, good, get the fuck out of there. Never come back and fucking be visited by these shitheads.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it goes to your point too, Johnny, that at the end when he walks away from the Mr. Punch puppet and he's like, and I walked away from it, I left it. He's choosing, okay, I don't know what happened. I'm not going to I'm going to move on.
He probably has a pretty strong sense of it, but he's like, okay, I'm just going to.
He's not going to let it take over.
Right.
Really, yeah. So I love this book. I think if you're not into comic books, like how I thought comic books were, and it was just such an interesting piece.
Well, I think this book is, if you just paint comic books as these flimsy little things that you throw away and they're for children, read this book, because you'll be like, holy shit, this is a fucking beautiful. This is like the equivalent of the PlayStation game Journey, where it's made on this it's made in this
arcadey children's medium.
Yeah, it's something that in our culture is supposed to be for children or immature people, but when you look at it and you realize like it's a beautiful work of art, there's so many layers and textures to it, and that's how the video game journey is. It's a beautiful experience. It's real short, but it's like a beautiful. It's just the journey is the journey. Like when you get to the end of the game, it just loops back around to the beginning. Not that this is what Mr. Punch does, but it's the same thing where it's just like it's a fucking work of art, and to paint it as a trivial thing is doing the medium an injustice and yourself an injustice not to read it.
And to touch off on a point that you mentioned, Johnny, it really says something about Neil Gaiman as an author, because this is the type of comic, like if you just told me like a synopsis and maybe showed me a few screenshots, I would go, this guy's trying way too hard to be alternative, right? You're trying to be an alternative comic, and you're trying really too hard. And I've seen those comics where there's like a wall of prose, and they try to be really deep. And I did quote marks, and no one can see that. But anyway,
well, no, like there's a getting back to Michael Chabon, the author. He shows off his education in his writing, and it's almost his writing is just on the cusp of being too highbrow. It's right on that edge of you're like, God,
Dennis Miller.
Yeah, kind of like that. Almost like, yeah. Whereas his is just as sophisticated as that, but it's much more palatable. It
feels very visceral.
Yeah, it's easier to take in. I don't know, and not in a bad way. He's an amazing writer.
Like one of the my favorite scene in here was he was talking about his grandfather joking with him and saying something like, "I'm gonna throw you in the water and pick you up and throw you down," and like how that actually sounded very terrifying to him. And then I realized, that's how I was as a kid. Like, I do that sometimes with my kids. Like, hey, I'm going to pick you up and swing you around. But from a kid's point of view, that is such a mind fuck. And you're like...
Yeah, I think that's what makes the story so easy to relate to, too, as opposed to The Killing Joke. This is told from the viewpoint of a child, so you feel kind of safe taking this road with the child. You still kind of feel like you're in control as the adult when you're reading this, as opposed to if it was like an adult male you probably wouldn't be as engaged. This makes you want to really...
And like he captures childhood well. It's almost like Stephen King and It.
Right.
Where it's...
Despite the horrific subject, it still gets the essence.
It still gets to the core of like being a child, where you are innocent, but you're really intuitive and aware of things that some adults will say, "Oh, he's just a kid. He doesn't know what's going on." Or she doesn't know. She doesn't get what we're talking about. Or it's like, well, no, you're doing the child a disservice. That's why I fucking hate baby talking children. I hate it when people baby talk children. I really do.
And that's something you bring up a good point too, because my sister will tell me a lot. She's 4 years older than me. We'll be talking about something that happened. She's like, "No, you don't remember. You're too young." I was like, "I was 10. I do remember. I wasn't too young." And for her to just invalidate me or what I recall, because she's older, is always so infuriating. But and she's my big sister. But a lot of people just think, "Oh, you're little. They're little. Right. It's okay. They won't remember. They don't understand." When really, the kids do. They do understand.
It sticks with you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stick with you as a photograph. It sticks with you with these weird patchwork quilts of memory.
It's glommed on, just like it's like a wet piece of paper thrown against the ceiling. Like it's stuck there, and you're like, it's not clean and without wrinkles and whatnot, but it's there, and I know it.
So I highly recommend it. I liked it.
I?
And I'm going to read it, and I'm sure I'm going to highly recommend it.
You should read it, Johnny, and then we should do a podcast with just you talking about it.
Oh, yeah. Or I'll cut out my sections in this, and I'll chime in.
Or we'll pause.
Or I'll afterthought, Afterthought, but Johnny.
Where can people find us?
Well, on Twitter, you can find us at GN Explorers Club. And then also gnexplorersclub.com. And probably on Instagram. I think I set up a Facebook page as well. I need to put something on there. That's where it is.
You can follow me at Words and Waffles on Instagram, where you will see the beautiful cover of Mr. Punch.
Francis does all of our photography.
And a fantastic job, by the way. I don't even know.
Super duper like Gary Cooper.
When I get a smartphone in my hand, I take a picture. It looks like shit. And
that's Sasha. I always give Sasha she's the my girlfriend. I almost said the official girlfriend of the podcast. That's what she is.
As opposed to the other one.
That's what she is on my other podcast.
Oh, so we have to find you a new girlfriend for this one.
Well, then it'd be the unofficial. No, I always, I'm like, do you not know how to operate your camera phone? Like on your phone? Like, it's so blurry. I'm just like, what did you do? Did you wipe some grease off your neck and then smudge out the window, the camera apparatus? Like, what happened here? Sorry, that was way off topic here. Is it my turn?
Yeah,
All right. You can follow me at Twitter at Serious Talk Twit, Instagram Serious Talk Johnny, and my other podcast at stspodcast.com.
And we're going to be on iTunes.
And
we are on iTunes.
We are on iTunes. Share the link. Tell your friends.
Yeah,
get
put
the
word out
comic.
there.
Read
anywhere
it.
where you follow podcasts. I think we're going to try to be on, Google Play even.
No,
we can.
we're not. That
What?
thing's horrible. But
Sorry,
let us know
Google
what you
Play.
think about the comic book after you read it.
Yeah, if you've read it and you want to chime in, please share your thoughts. And if you thought we were way wrong, you could still tell us. We just will ignore you.
I mean, Johnny didn't read it, so you can just chime in right
Yeah.
now.
Right.
Be like me.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. We'll be back next week with Alan's War by Alan Guibert, and I did say it right this time. Thanks for checking out today's episode. Fuck you. This is my show. I run this.
I gotta get situated here.
Oh, that's right. Go for it. Thanks for checking out today's episode of Graphic Novel Explorers Club. I'm one of your hosts, Dennis Supachana. Baba Mama Fucker.
That was way better.
Fucker.
Baba Mama.
Baba Mama Fucker.
Hello. 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 Hello.